Tiberian Dawn is notably rather stingy when it comes to dates. We know that Tiberium came to Earth in 1995, the year of the game's release, and we know that the first Tiberium War lasted for around 3 years.
Center ends more than 3 years of continued escalating violence.
But how much time elapsed between the arrival of Tiberium and the outbreak of the war? The concept of the first CNC is a near-future conflict, though this could go either way. It's a conflict set in the near future, or a conflict set in the present, the mid-90s, with technology from the near future. I think we can safely rule out the start being in 1995, as that would give no time at all for Tiberium to have propagated around the entire planet, so that leaves us with some time after that. My headcanon has been to place it around the turn of the century, and that's what I've alluded to in prior lore videos in the absence of certainty, though there's nothing to back this up. Much like the notion of the Second World War of Red Alert taking place in 1946, dating the start of Tib War 1 to 1995 appears to be apocryphal. We do have a handful of earlier dates, such as the year of GDI's founding. This was 1990 in the manual, but I believe it was given as 1966 on the old official website, and which was carried over to Renegade's website as well, though I wouldn't put too much stock into this site in terms of canonicity, since it claims discoveries surrounding the mutagenic properties of Tiberium were made in the 1980s, which predates the meteor. At any rate, the manual gives 95 as the most recent known year, but it doesn't say when the present is. We have some events posted to the official site that occur in between the games, but none of them are dated. These don't count, this is the date IRL that the post went live. Still, this is the first game to give a definite year for its own events, 2030, into early 2031 for Firestorm. Tiberium Wars presented an extensive intel database for additional lore surrounding the game. Searching for dates, we have an affirmation that the meteor arrived in 1995, which is the only date from the 20th century, and a bunch of dates in the 21st. Discounting those that occurred after Tib's Sun, we're left with only one entry, a reference to GDI anti-piracy legislature dated 2017. It's possible GDI was being used interchangeably here with the UN, which founded the initiative and still oversaw operations at least as late as Tib War 1. By the Second Tiberian War, GDI had superseded the UN to become a supranational state unto itself. We don't exactly know when the transition happened. The Intel database isn't the only lore source from Tib Wars. The GDI Style Guide is an in-universe document detailing the faction's design conventions, though it does appear to spin off into a lot of detail on facets which are never explored elsewhere, so whether this document is canon is debatable. There are a couple of dates from before 2030, such as a note of an 85% reduction of friendly fire incidents since 2027, thanks to the recognisability of the silhouette of GDI's H-shaped tanks. Most interesting, though I use that term loosely since none of the following appears to be backed up anywhere else, is an entire page on a company called Otani Lincoln Laboratories, reported to be GDI's prime military contractor for a variety of purposes. To cut through the jargon, the impression is given that Otani Lincoln is the in-universe explanation for some of the video gamey base building mechanics. The cited buildings credited to Otani Lincoln are concept art of the GDI barracks, silo and war factory, though these designs didn't make it into the final game, implying this document was written pretty early on. The main point of interest for us is that a partnership between Otani Lincoln and GDI was proposed as early as 2006. It's not mentioned in this document, but the way that this company is described implies loosely that they may have been responsible for the MCV. Interesting if true, but no more than implied, though their first contract with GDI is dated to 2009. Alright, what can we find in the cutscenes? Tib Dawn and Tib Sun didn't really discuss prior years, but Tib Wars occasionally mentions the arrival of Tiberium, or thereabouts.
Rejoice, children of Nod, the blood of your oppressors will flow, and 50 years of tyranny will finally end.
The year is 2047, meaning roughly 1997. Well, the 50 years thing is most likely rounded. GDI was publicly founded in 1995 with the arrival of Tiberium, and Nod likewise entered the world stage at around the same time in their own bid for the crystal. The war may not have necessarily started in 95, but the conflict certainly did. Or, knowing Nod, maybe even earlier. Then things get interesting.
Hood worked tirelessly to acquire samples of the precious crystal, to study it, to unlock its potential as a new energy source. The mainstream media branded us terrorists. But in 2019, we exposed GDI as the real terrorists.
2019. That's not a year I had come across in CNC. There's nothing significant about it. What happened in 2019? At first I did a quick search through the Intel database, but nothing. No mention of that year. Nothing in the Tib Wars or Kane's Wrath manuals either. So that's weird. It's a neat indication, but a date not backed up by any other source, and little indication as to what actually happened on that date, it doesn't add up to much. Tib Wars also famously got the year in which GDI acquired the Tacitus wrong, giving 2028 instead of 2030, which is commonly accepted to be a production error.
In 2028, GDI confiscated a very sophisticated data matrix from Nod.
No, we need more.
For 28 years of fighting Nod, there's one thing I can say with absolute certainty. As long as there's Tiberium on Earth, Nod is a serious threat.
Did you catch that? 28 years of fighting Nod. 2047 minus 28, 2019. Maybe we're onto something. Have you ever read Kane's Criminal Dossier? It's an in-universe document written by GDI INOPS shortly before Tib War 2, and there's a lot of really valuable information in it. Shame we can't see most of it. I about did a double take when I was reading through it again recently because there's that year again. From 1995 to 2019, Kane stealthily travelled the globe one step ahead of GDI, discreetly spreading his message of a Tiberium revolution. This timeline doesn't imply a war, doesn't imply he had died. Between the First and Second Tiberium Wars, GDI believed Kane to be dead, and only very few among Nod knew that he yet lived. It's starting to sound more and more like the First Tiberium War began in 2019. Still, all three of these sources were from Tiberium Wars, a game I enjoy but can understand those who feel it is too different from Westward's direction. After all, the Tibson Story Bible states that it has been 15 years since the First War, though it doesn't give a year for the present, and there is a lot in here that is non-canon, so it's no good referencing that as a source. And then, we found it. Renegade, the last CNC under Westward's name. It was there all along. Now, I'm happy to consider any official promotional resource to be canon, providing it doesn't contradict the lore established in the games, and as long as it's, competent. And the primary extra ludum resource is the game manual. I needn't remind anyone that Renegade is set during the events of Tiberian Dawn, and right there, in the manual, a message from Eva to Havoc regarding the ongoing conflict between GDI and Nod sent before the events of Renegade, dated to the 12th of March, 2020. Direct, unambiguous confirmation from an official in-universe Westward source that by this date, the First Tiberium War was hot. This is our timeline. Nod begins to make noise in the early 90s in preparation, fostering ties to the equatorial nations that will soon play host to the majority of the Earth's Tiberium. The UN is aware of the Brotherhood as a terrorist organisation at least as early as '94. The meteor arrives in Italy in '95, and the Global Defence Initiative is established from a UN Spec Ops group to operate as peacekeepers and to study the crystal. For the next 2 decades, Tiberium slowly propagates around the planet, primarily with the use of mutated plant life to expel crystal-laden spores into the air, but also using, quote, conveyance unknown.
Unknown to them, perhaps.
When a US defense contractor scandal reveals the true extent of the Brotherhood's wealth and military capabilities, the conflict between the two factions for the control of Tiberium is exacerbated, until in 2019, the First Tiberium War begins. The war lasted for more than 3 years before forces under Commander Solomon fired the ion cannon upon the Sarajevo Temple of Nod. This would of course not be the end. Immediately following the war, GDI began construction of a prototype exo-power suit, a walker for combat use in toxic environs. This would form the basis of the Wolverine-powered assault armor, which would be put into service soon thereafter.
Damn Wolverines! Want of them took out my brother in 2023.
In the short decade that followed, the Tiberium incursion would intensify as it transitions to the next phase of propagation. The stage is set. In conclusion, CNC Remastered launched at a very apt time. My name is Stefan. Thank you so much for watching.